The pastor spoke in a voice that made even the lights sit still. People said the right words in the right order, and set them down on the front pew like flowers that would never need water. I stood when I was meant to stand, sat when the hymn ended, bowed my head at the name that once came running down the stairs when I called for dinner. My daughter. The syllables fit nowhere now. Afterwards, the church basement filled with steam from coffee urns, and the rustle of vinyl tablecloths. Casseroles arrived in every shade of comfort, cheddar under crushed crackers, chicken under breadcrumbs, love masked as sodium. Women I hadn't seen in years pressed my hands and my elbows, and sometimes my shoulder, as if I might tip if they let go too soon. I thanked them all with the same small sentence because anything bigger would break in my mouth. Her picture stood on an easel by the punch bowl. She was laughing at something none of us could see anymore, head thrown back, the kind of laugh that made you grateful to be in the room. People touched the frame like a talisman. I didn't. I kept filling cups and moving chairs, performing usefulness the way men do when the alternative is drowning in public. My son-in-law held court by the door, a suit that fit better than the day. He shook hands, accepted condolences, told a story about her college prank that made the room bravest smile. He looked like a man passing for himself. When he caught my eye, he gave me a nod, brief and unreadable. We were both made of splinters and duct tape. At some point a child, someone's nephew, wild with sugar and permission, ran a lap around the tables and clipped my knee. I staggered a fraction and caught myself on the back of a folding chair. The metal was cold, and the little sting of it, the quick pain, felt like a kindness. It gave my body something specific to feel. We took the last pans home in the trunk, tin lids breathing in and out with the road. In the kitchen, my wife's absence moved like a draft I couldn't find the source of, and still I stacked the dishes and labeled the foil because order is a raft. Friends trickled in behind us with more food and stories, then stories without food, and then just their coats as they left, promising to check in tomorrow, next week, always. Evening pressed its face to the windows. The house loosened its shoulders by degrees. I washed a plate that didn't need washing and set it to dry. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. The refrigerator hummed like a tired hymn. When the last door clicked shut, the silence arrived on both feet. I stood in the hallway where her height marks still climbed the molding in pencil, where the top line will now always be the top line. My hands, empty at last, didn't know where to go. I leaned my forehead to the wall and found it cool. For a long time I didn't move. I waited for the wave that had been pacing offshore all day to rise and take me. When it came, it was not a shout but a flood, and I let it have my name. The door shut behind the last casserole, and the house exhaled. Paper plates leaned against the sink like tired soldiers. The coffee urn clicked as it cooled. I walked a loop I didn't remember deciding to walk, dining room, hallway, living room, collecting napkins, setting them in a neat stack as if order could barter with absence. He was by the mantel, my son-in-law, straightening a photo that has been straight for years. His tie was loosened, his face the gray you get when you've outlasted your own bravado. "Thank you," I said, because that's the sentence men give each other when there's nothing left to carry but air. He didn't nod. He watched my hands smooth a tablecloth that didn't need smoothing and said, in a voice that had all the warmth of the refrigerator hum, "Pack your bags. Learn to move on." It landed without echo. A clean blow. The words didn't rise or fall. They simply occupied the room, took a chair, crossed their legs. For a second I thought I'd misheard. The clock in the hall took 3 deliberate breaths while my ears caught up to my bones. Then he gave me a deadline like a plumber gives an estimate. 24 hours. Long enough to pretend it was kindness, short enough to make mercy feel like a trick of the light. I stood in my daughter's hallway with its scuffed baseboards and family photos that now leaned away from me, and I understood that time can be both a room and a trap. The pastor spoke in a voice that made even the lights sit still. People said the right words in the right order, and set them down on the front pew like flowers that would never need water. I stood when I was meant to stand, sat when the hymn ended, bowed my head at the name that once came running down the stairs when I called for dinner. My daughter. The syllables fit nowhere now. Afterwards, the church basement filled with steam from coffee urns, and the rustle of vinyl tablecloths. Casseroles arrived in every shade of comfort, cheddar under crushed crackers, chicken under breadcrumbs, love masked as sodium. Women I hadn't seen in years pressed my hands and my elbows, and sometimes my shoulder, as if I might tip if they let go too soon. I thanked them all with the same small sentence because anything bigger would break in my mouth. Her picture stood on an easel by the punch bowl. She was laughing at something none of us could see anymore, head thrown back, the kind of laugh that made you grateful to be in the room. People touched the frame like a talisman. I didn't. I kept filling cups and moving chairs, performing usefulness the way men do when the alternative is drowning in public. My son-in-law held court by the door, a suit that fit better than the day. He shook hands, accepted condolences, told a story about her college prank that made the room bravest smile. He looked like a man passing for himself. When he caught my eye, he gave me a nod, brief and unreadable. We were both made of splinters and duct tape. At some point a child, someone's nephew, wild with sugar and permission, ran a lap around the tables and clipped my knee. I staggered a fraction and caught myself on the back of a folding chair. The metal was cold, and the little sting of it, the quick pain, felt like a kindness. It gave my body something specific to feel. We took the last pans home in the trunk, tin lids breathing in and out with the road. In the kitchen, my wife's absence moved like a draft I couldn't find the source of, and still I stacked the dishes and labeled the foil because order is a raft. Friends trickled in behind us with more food and stories, then stories without food, and then just their coats as they left, promising to check in tomorrow, next week, always. Evening pressed its face to the windows. The house loosened its shoulders by degrees. I washed a plate that didn't need washing and set it to dry. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. The refrigerator hummed like it tired him. When the last door clicked shut, the silence arrived on both feet. I stood in the hallway where her height marks still climbed the molding in pencil, where the top line will now always be the top line. My hands, empty at last, didn't know where to go. I leaned my forehead to the wall and found it cool. For a long time I didn't move. I waited for the wave that had been pacing offshore all day to rise and take me. When it came, it was not a shout but a flood, and I let it have my name. The door shut behind the last casserole, and the house exhaled. Paper plates leaned against the sink like tired soldiers. The coffee urn clicked as it cooled. I walked a loop I didn't remember deciding to walk, dining room, hallway, living room, collecting napkins, setting them in a neat stack as if order could barter with absence. He was by the mantel, my son-in-law, straightening a photo that has been straight for years. His tie was loosened, his face the gray you get when you've outlasted your own bravado. "Thank you," I said, because that's the sentence men give each other when there's nothing left to carry but air. He didn't nod. He watched my hands smooth a tablecloth that didn't need smoothing and said, in a voice that had all the warmth of the refrigerator hum, "Pack your bags. Learn to move on." It landed without echo. A clean blow. The words didn't rise or fall. They simply occupied the room, took a chair, crossed their legs. For a second I thought I'd misheard. The clock in the hall took 3 deliberate breaths while my ears caught up to my bones. Then he gave me a deadline like a plumber gives an estimate. 24 hours. Long enough to pretend it was kindness, short enough to make mercy feel like a trick of the light. I stood in my daughter's hallway with its scuffed baseboards and family photos that now leaned away from me, and I understood that time can be both a room and a trap. Morning has a different sound in a parking lot. Not birds, compressors kicking on, a truck downshifting, the sigh of a back door's hinge as a kid with a mop steps into a day he hasn't earned yet. I carried a toothbrush in my pocket like contraband, nodded to no one, and learned the angle of a face under fluorescent light that says I belong here, I am quick, I leave it cleaner than I found it. The mirror told the truth, and I stared it down long enough to pass as a man who was only washing up. Coffee bought me time. 1 cup, black, refilled without asking if I kept the rhythm of gratitude small and regular. The waitress called me on the way waitresses do when they decide to forgive the world for one more day. I adopted a corner booth and a newspaper someone else had surrendered. If I folded it wide enough, it felt like a wall. Cheap coffee is a clock. You sip it to mark an hour, to belong to something besides the back seat of a sedan. Invisibility isn't a magic trick, it's a posture. You move parallel to purpose. You don't linger near the door that staff use because it confuses the story. You learn which gas station is soap that's more than a rumor. You memorize the security guard's route and time your sleep like a tide. 20 minutes at a stretch, the engine off, keys turned in the ignition just enough to promise warmth if you need it. At night, I drove past my daughter's street and did not turn in. The house was dark except for the window, where the hallway nightlight throws a square onto the floorboards. I pictured two small bodies breathing there, certainty rising and falling in pajamas. I let that picture do its work, and then I made it stop. A man can drown in what used to be. In the glove box, I kept a pencil and a receipt. I wrote down what I learned because learning made it smaller. The quiet parking lot behind the library, the diner sink that runs hot, the way to sleep with your shoes under your knees so no one can take them without waking you. I kept my wedding ring in my pocket. Metal is cold until it isn't, and the warming of it in my palm was proof I was still here. The second night was easier because that is the treachery of survival. It feels like competence. I told myself this was a bridge, not a destination. Then I reclined the seat, eased my shoulder into the familiar ache, and disappeared for a while on purpose. I told myself I was only taking the long way back to the diner, that the light was better on the old Elm Line Street, that habits aren't handcuffs. The car turned on its own. I parked half a block away and walked the sidewalk like a man passing through a museum he didn't buy a ticket for. At the corner, I stopped behind the hedge where the fence drops just enough to make you taller. The house looked smaller without her in it. A bright blue dumpster squatted in the driveway like a decision. Two men in gloves moved through the rooms as if they were bailing a boat. A chair came first, the reading chair she stole from me when she discovered it swallowed a bleak afternoon whole. The fabric had a threadbare patch where her heel used to worry a groove. They carried it chest high and fed it to the metal. The hollow thud was louder than a sound that size has any right to be. Next was the bookcase from her childhood room, the one we'd sanded together on a Saturday when she was 12 and too proud to ask for help. It still had a smear of blue paint on the underside from the time she insisted on doing the trim herself and laughed when she saw the drip on her shoe. The shelves were still full, spines I recognized like faces in a family photo, dog-eared paperbacks, the cookbook open to pancakes stained with oil in morning. The men tipped the whole memory sideways and sent it into the bin, bindings knocking like teeth. Her desk followed, the oak scarred with a circle where a mug once sat too long during finals. I knew the sound the drawer made when it stuck. I could have told them to lift with a palm underneath and it would come easy. They didn't. The drawer split and scattered pens, a ribbon, a dry corsage that puffed into petals when it hit. One of the men laughed at something the other said. They could have been unloading shingles. They could have been anywhere. Cleo stood near the garage in leggings and a bright new smile, phone to her ear, the free hand stitching the air as if she were describing a better weather report. Her hair was perfect. She didn't look at the things, only the space empty by them. Fresh start. The phrase floated over the fence like a smell. I tasted metal again. I watched a shoebox appear, the one my daughter kept under her bed, with the hospital bracelet, the Polaroid from camp, the note I wrote her the day she moved away for college. Call when you land. Eat real food. Be kind to yourself. They didn't open it. They threw it. The lid popped and the contents rose and fell like startled birds. I put a hand on the fence because standing suddenly required work. Across the yard, the pencil marks where we'd measured the grandchildren still climbed the doorframe. No one threw those away. Not yet. A small mercy, or maybe just oversight. The men went back inside. The dumpster side. I left before they brought out the last box. I couldn't risk seeing which thing would make a noise I couldn't swallow. At the end of the block I looked back once and saw my reflection in the car window, an older man with a borrowed sky behind him. I drove away slowly, as if speed might shake loose the image of a life lifted and tipped, and promised the empty seat beside me that I would not let the past be treated like trash much longer. The phone rang while I was counting the quarters in my palm to see if I could afford another coffee without having to apologize for the time I'd already occupied. Unknown number. I almost let it go. These days, calls meant reminders that the world likes its bills paid on time and its grief kept private. I slid my thumb across the screen because some part of me still answers when asked. Mr. Hale? A man's voice, careful, vowels laid out in order. My name is Daniel Ross. I was your daughter's attorney. The diner around me went on being a diner. Knife on plate, a laugh from the grill, the soft hiss of bacon. My own name sounded like a stranger's. "Yes, I've been trying to reach you," he said, and I heard no accusation in it, only fact. "There are matters regarding your daughter's estate, and a letter she left in my care. It's important we meet." "Estate," I repeated, a word too formal to fit the back booth where the vinyl stuck to my wrist. "She didn't have—" I stopped, because I didn't know what she had. There is a particular shame in realizing how much of your child's adult life you watched from the bleachers, cheering at the right moments, missing the huddle. "She was thorough," he said. "Could you come today? I understand short notice is difficult. I'll work around you." I looked at my reflection in the window, hair that needed a decision, shirt with a collar that remembered better days. "I'm not exactly—" I began, and then decided dignity doesn't need starch. "Give me the address." His office was glass and quiet, and smelled faintly of paper that had been taken seriously. I sat in a chair that didn't creak and cradled the coffee his assistant put in my hands, as if she had guessed how long it had been since anyone offered me something hot without asking for money first. Daniel Ross had a face that had been trained to deliver hard things gently. He didn't look at the scuffs on my shoes. He looked at me. "Your daughter made changes after her diagnosis," he said, opening a folder the color of courthouse stone. "Provisions for the children. For you. She anticipated complications." The pause was a place for me to set down my anger without breaking it. He slid a single envelope across the desk. My name in her hand. She always made her R's too big, as if they meant more than other letters. I didn't open it. Not yet. He began to speak. Of trusts and guardianship petitions, of life insurance and accounts I'd never heard of instructions that only activate when certain conditions are met. Life, it turns out, can continue to love you with the cold logic of a contract. "She named you," he said. "Primary guardian if necessary. Financial support attached. Documentation of her wishes. Recordings." He watched my face as if I might break, and he was ready to catch the larger pieces. "I've been sleeping in my car," I said, because honesty is cheaper than pride and buys more. "I'm not sure I look like a man a court would hand 2 children to." He nodded once, as if he'd expected the confession and had saved a place for it. "We'll address housing immediately. Tonight if we must. Your daughter left funds for just this scenario. She was particular." I opened the letter. Her voice came up off the page in the tilt of the words. "Dad, if this finds you, it means I wasn't able to say it to your face without making it harder on us both. Please do what you do best. Show up. Take care of my kids. Take care of yourself. I've made sure you can. Do not let anyone make you small in the house we built with love." I set the paper down carefully. The hum in my chest that had been fear for weeks changed pitch. Not courage yet, but something headed there. "What happens first?" I asked. "We get you keys," he said. "Then we get you the children." Her handwriting made a sound in my head before my eyes caught up, the way a certain laugh can walk into a room before the person does. She'd always leaned too hard on the pen when she cared about the sentence. The downstrokes dug little canyons in the paper. My name at the top was both an invitation and a hand on my shoulder. I sat in the borrowed chair in the lawyer's office and let the envelope give up what it had been holding for me. "Dad, if you're reading this, we didn't get the luxury of saying it out loud without making it worse. I know you. You would have tried to be brave for me while I tried to be brave for you, and we would have ended up pretending the truth wasn't standing in the doorway. So I wrote it down while I still had the strength to be specific. First, love. You gave me a childhood made of pancakes, lectures about seatbelts, and the quiet way you fixed things without announcing it. When I was small, I believed every house had a dad who showed up exactly when he said he would. When I learned that wasn't always true, I loved you harder for making it look ordinary. Second, instructions. I've set things in motion that you won't like because they sound like paperwork instead of love. They are love in a colder costume. There's a trust for the kids that you control if it comes to that. Housing funds for you because I know you would try to make do with less than you deserve. A letter to the school. A file with passwords and account numbers. A list of dentists because James will crack a tooth on something he swears wasn't that hard. I can't tuck you in. I can leave you a map. Third, the part one wish I didn't have to write. If you feel small or pushed out in the house where my laughter used to live, do not mistake enduring for loyalty. You taught me that love without boundaries curdles into something that looks like duty and tastes like regret. Protect the children. If you need the court to help you do it, ask. If you need the lawyer to show the judge who I am and what I wanted, he has recordings and documents and a version of my voice speaking after I'm done speaking. Don't let anyone convince you that grief is a reason to be cruel or that money is a measure of care. Practical notes I can't not include. Emma sleeps better if you leave the hallway light on. James pretends he hates being read to. He doesn't. The pancake recipe is the one with too much vanilla. The photos from Halloween are in the blue box. Please put them in frames. We are not a museum. We are a family with walls that remember. Last permission. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to cry in the kitchen over the dish towel, and then tell the kids the truth about why your eyes are red. You're allowed to find a morning that isn't heavy, and not feel guilty about it. Take walks. Paint something. Say yes to help even when your jaw wants to say no. Take my hand, Dad. I'm putting it where you can reach it without looking up, on the page, in their hair, on the knob of the front door you will open 100 times and never lock against them. Protect them if needed. Protect yourself even when you don't think you're worth the effort. You are? Always. Your girl. Daniel slid the folder across his desk like a dealer who'd already seen my hand. Inside, the paper didn't look like rescue. It looked like print and margins, and the calm of someone who prepares for storms by sandbagging when the sky is still blue. He tapped a page. "This is the seal provision," he said, and the word seal found a place in my chest that had gone drafty. It read like a bridge disguised as law. If I am removed from the residence I shared with my children, or if access between my father and my children is impeded or conditioned on payment, the following provisions activate. Activate, like a furnace waking at 3 a.m. when the house forgets how to be warm. There were clauses about immediate housing funds to be released to me, about a trust shifting from advisory to my control, about guardianship petitions that filed themselves the moment the ink recognized the shape of cruelty. There were dates and signatures, and the measured steps of a woman I had raised to read the whole contract before she signed her name. He turned the next page. "There's also a trigger for isolation," he said, and showed me the sentences that made the room square itself. If the children's contact with their maternal family is materially limited without cause, or if photographs, mementos, or traditions are removed under the guise of clean slate, the trustee shall notify the court and request temporary placement with my father pending hearing. It was my daughter's voice rearranged into statute, her stubborn soft heart translated into terms a judge could not misinterpret. I traced, not touched, only followed with my eyes, the places where her pen had pressed hard enough for the notary's stamp to ripple the page. She had anticipated more than my sorrow. She had anticipated my hesitation. Provisions for me, if I did what I always do, try to be decent a little too long. Stipends that started the day the door closed on me. Keys, in effect, printed in black ink. "What does it require from me?" I asked, because men like me look for the price even when the sign says gift. "Show up," Daniel said. "Document what you've already endured. Let the mechanism work. We'll file the notice today." I thought of the night in the car with my shoes tucked under my knees so no one could steal them without waking me. I thought of the dumpster swallowing her chair and her books and the shoebox with the hospital bracelet. I thought of the cereal cupboard where I'd left a note like a flare. In the quiet between those thoughts, something old in me stood up and stretched. Not pride. Spine. He slid over a pen and pointed to a line that wanted only my acknowledgement that I had received what she left. My hand was steady. The signature looked like mine, and also like the man she believed I still was. On the last page, there was a paragraph I hadn't expected. If my father hesitates, remind him he taught me that love is not passive. Remind him he kept the hallway light on. Remind him he can do hard things quietly. I closed the folder, and the room felt warmer without changing temperature. Outside, the day was a shade of ordinary that would have gone unnoticed yesterday. I stepped onto the sidewalk with the folder under my arm, lighter for the weight of it. The clause had not given me permission to be angry. It had given me instructions for what to do with my anger. Funds would move. Papers would file. Doors would open. And when they did, I would be standing there with my hands out, not to beg, but to catch the children my daughter had kept safe with her last, best sentence. Daniel's office became a sorting table for a life that had tried to hide in plain sight. He had me sit by the window where the light was honest and handed me a legal pad. "Write what you remember," he said, and the sentence felt like a key. Memory, it turns out, is a better witness when you give it a chair. We started with the easy things, dates that had already carved themselves into bone. The week after the funeral, when the locks were changed. "For safety." The text I received at 10:42 p.m. "We're simplifying. Please don't come by unannounced." The email to the school that removed my name from the pickup list without so much as a reply all. Each fact sat on the page like a small, patient weight. Daniel's paralegal printed messages by the yard. Threads where my son-in-law's tone changed by degrees from grief to logistics to something like sales. Household items listed online under "lightly used." An SUV in the "No Lowballers" forum. A caption beneath a staged living room. "Fresh start vibes." He'd left the kids' art tacked to the refrigerator in one photo, but zooming in you could see the edges curling where the tape had been peeled up and repositioned for the shot. Bank records told a colder story. Tuition payments delayed while deposits to a high-end furniture store cleared overnight. A retreat in Palm Springs flagged as professional development. Airline holds to a coastal city where his sister lives, with dates that suspiciously hug the end of the school year. The numbers didn't accuse. They simply refused to lie. The school folder was worst. Post-it notes about Emma's sudden quiet, James's missing homework after months of clean sheets. A counselor's email requesting a meeting about adjustment that had never been scheduled. I read the line twice. Student reports photos of mother removed from home for being too sad. I felt the pen press harder than the paper deserved and set it down before I tore something that wasn't mine. "Keep breathing," Daniel said without looking up. He worked like a man repairing a watch, tweezers and patience, tiny screws set in order. He asked for nothing I couldn't give. I gave more than I meant to because telling the truth in that room felt less like betrayal and more like turning on a light. Midway through, we found the messages that stitched the whole pattern together. A chat with a realtor, listing ASAP if we can. Market's hot, house shows better, without history. An exchange with a friend, hard to grieve, when everyone expects casseroles. Ready to move on. The friend sent a heart. He sent a checkmark. My daughter's calendar reminder still pinged on the shared account the day those texts were sent. Dad picks up at 3:15. Pancakes. We printed screenshots until the stack had the thickness of a thin book. Daniel slid rubber bands around it and wrote a clean label, Exhibits, Initial. He made a second pile of the small, human things that don't fit into boxes but sway judges. The crayon drawing where Emma had given everyone arms except herself. The note from James's teacher praising the day he finally spoke up in class. My daughter's dentist appointment reminder that no one had canceled. When we finished, the office was twilight, and my shoulders ached from sitting so straight. Daniel tapped the stack. "This," he said, "is a story with receipts." He didn't smile. Neither did I. We didn't need to. Outside, the hallway lights flickered on in sequence, and I thought of the way my daughter used to leave the hall light for the children when storms rattled the roof. Paper can be a light, too, if you put it in the right hands. I picked up the file. It was heavy. It felt exactly like the beginning of something that would hold. The courthouse smelled like paper and winter. Daniel met me on the steps with a folder already open to the right tabs, colored flags like small orders I could follow without thinking. I expected my hands to shake signing the petition for emergency visitation and temporary guardianship. They didn't. Fear had burned hot for weeks. Now it had cooled into something metallic and useful. We took a number as if we were waiting for cold cuts. The clerk behind the glass spoke in a language that always sounds like a test. Forms, affidavits, exhibits attached. Daniel translated. I initialed where the sticker told me to initial, and signed where my name belonged. In the lines where it asked for factual basis, I wrote what happened in the cleanest words I owned. Locked out, access denied, belongings discarded, children's contact restricted. I kept adjectives on a short leash. The truth didn't need my help to stand upright. A bailiff with a coffee-scarred voice called my name, and I followed him down a corridor that swallowed sound. The emergency judge saw us between hearings, robe open at the throat, reading glasses low. Daniel spoke first, precise as a metronome. He laid out the clause, the messages, the school notes. He didn't look dramatic because paper had done the work drama usually does. "Sir," the judge said to me, "do you understand the responsibilities you're asking for?" "I do." My voice surprised me by arriving exactly where I left it. "And you can provide a safe place immediately?" "Yes." Daniel slid over a hotel booking for the night, and a short-term lease set to start tomorrow. My daughter had paid for both with money that had been disguised as foresight. The judge looked at the receipts the way a carpenter looks at a beam and decides it will bear weight. He signed an order for visitation that day and temporary guardianship pending a full hearing. The pen made a sound I will hear when the house is quiet years from now. He added a line about supervised exchanges, about the children not being moved from the county without permission. The bailiff stamped everything with a thud that felt like a gavel inside my ribs. Outside, the air tasted like tin and relief. Daniel shook my hand and didn't say congratulations because this wasn't that. "We go to the school," he said. "You'll show this to the principal. The order speaks for you." I walked faster than I needed to. The folder under my arm warmed with my body heat until it felt less like paper and more like a small door I could carry. For weeks I'd been bracing for the next blow, a man on his heels waiting for pain. Now I was on the balls of my feet, balanced, moving towards something I could name. The fear didn't return. It had been replaced by a colder resolve that fit like a tool in my hand. I wasn't here to win. I was here to show up with the right keys. The courtroom was colder than the hallway, as if the air had been told to behave. Benches creaked under strangers. A clock that no one looked at kept the only honest time in the room. I sat at our table with a glass of water that tasted faintly of dust and metal, and tried to keep my hand still on the wood. Across the aisle, he checked his phone until the bailiff told him not to. He stared at the empty screen like it might develop sympathy. The judge entered without ceremony, robed dark as a closed door. We sat, and paper took the floor. Daniel spoke first, stacking facts the way you stack boards when you mean to build something square. He did not reach for adjectives, he reached for dates. He laid the clause in front of the court like a map. Then he nodded to the small speaker on the clerk's desk, and the room shifted from paperwork to presence. My daughter's voice filled the air. It was a recording made at a kitchen table I could picture from memory, the clink of her ring against a mug, the small drag of paper when she slid a note toward the microphone, so she wouldn't forget the points she meant to make. She spoke as if she were carrying a fragile thing in both hands, and didn't want to jostle it, steady, careful, no tremor to ask for praise. She said the children's names the way only someone who has kissed them while they slept can say them. She described their fears, their tells, the way Emma goes quiet when she wants to be brave, and how James laughs too loudly when he feels left behind. She said what she wanted for them, walls that remembered, routines that forgave, a home where grief could sit at the table without being told to mind its manners. She said my name. She did not make me a saint. She made me a man who shows up, who burns pancakes and apologizes for the smoke alarm, who leaves the hallway light on. "If I am gone," she said, and the words thinned the room, "and my children are handled like objects, or distance is used like a lock, my father knows what to do. Please let him." The speaker clicked softly when the recording ended. The judge did not look at anyone for a long breath. You could hear a page turn somewhere behind us, someone's pen cap worrying at a thumb. Then the judge adjusted her glasses and addressed the room in the voice of someone who has seen too many performances and learned to look for the tell. Counsel for the other side tried to sell a story of stability and fresh starts. It slid on the tile and didn't find footing. The school's notes spoke in their thin, unembellished script. The bank records did not emote. The photographs, the blank walls, the stage smiles, laid down a quiet that didn't feel like peace. When the order came, it came clean. Temporary custody to be pending review, visitation defined by the children's needs, no relocation without permission, the trust activated as written. The gavel wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound that stayed with me was her voice from the speaker, love arranged in advance, measured and notarized, but still unmistakably hers. I stood because everyone stood. I breathed because I could. And for the first time in weeks, the future didn't look like a hallway with all the lights off. The keys felt heavier than they should, a little fist of metal in my pocket that kept reminding me I had something to unlock. The apartment manager handed them over with a practiced smile and a checklist for the move-in inspection. I walked through the rooms like a man counting blessings out loud so he won't forget any. 2 small bedrooms. A living room that would be brayed with lamps. A kitchen whose linoleum had given up pretending to be tile. I opened the windows and let ordinary air in. The twins' beds came flat in boxes that swore they were simple. I laid the pieces out on the floor and followed the instructions like scripture. Slat, bolt, washer, repeat. By the time I tightened the last Allen screw, sweat had found the small of my back and the rooms had stopped echoing. I set sheets with blue stripes on one, yellow stars on the other. The pillows looked too new, so I punched them once to give them a history. In the kitchen I unpacked a skillet, a whisk, and the bottle of cheap vanilla I grabbed without thinking. Pancakes were always the password in this family. I mixed batter the way my hands remembered. Too much vanilla, a little extra salt because grief dulls everything and breakfast should refuse to. When the pan warmed and the first butter slid to the edges and went quiet, the place began to smell like home on purpose. The social worker knocked at 3:15 sharp. Behind her, 2 small faces that tried to be careful and failed the moment they saw the stack of books by the window and the rug shaped like a street with painted intersections. Emma went in first. She was already half out of habit, half out of hope. Jane stood in the doorway and took in the room like a referee. Walls, exits, the distance from couch to kitchen, the beds visible down the short hall. "Which one's mine?" he asked, because some questions are tests and some are lifelines. "Whichever you choose," I said. "We can swap tomorrow if you change your mind." He picked the one with the stars and didn't explain. Emma ran a hand along the blue stripes and announced hers by the way she smoothed the corner. "Can I put my rocks on the windowsill?" she said. "Please do. They'll keep the glass from getting lonely." We ate on mismatched plates at the little table I'd hauled up the stairs one leg at a time. The first pancake came out a little too dark and I handed it to myself the way I always had, leaving the good ones for them. Syrup found its way into hair and onto the floor. I didn't rush. We started small, the way you learn a song by humming the easy parts. Homework at the table, pencils and a jar that used to hold wooden spoons. I made a rule that wasn't a rule. You can spread your worksheets as wide as your reach. James tested it with a math page that traveled like a continent. Emma lined up spelling words beside her rock collection, as if language needed ballast. When they argued about whose eraser was luckier, I let the argument end in laughter and crumbs instead of shame. After dinner, dishes went into soapy water to think about their behavior while we read. I took the armchair by the lamp, and they claimed the worn couch like veterans. We started with the book their mother loved at their age, the one with a dog that understood more than most people. Emma read the parts with italics. James read the sound effects with unnecessary enthusiasm. When the dog got lost in chapter 5, both of them went quiet. I didn't hurry the silence. I let the page lie open until their breathing found the same measure. Some nights we cried because grief is a guest who doesn't knock. It would arrive in the middle of a sentence, James describing a kickball game, Emma trying to remember the word for meteor, and then the air would thin. I learned the choreography: put the kettle on, sit on the floor, keep eye level honest. No one had to excuse themselves to the bathroom to be brave alone. Tears were for the room, like stories and socks. I said out loud what I wish someone had told me when I was small. Crying is just your love with the lid off. We built other rituals with the pieces that used to hurt. Saturday mornings we took the blue box of photos to the table and chose 3 to frame. 1 for the hall, 1 for each nightstand. If a picture made the room too tight, we set it aside without ceremony. The rule was simple: we hold what we can, and what we can't we visit later. At bedtime, I left the hallway light on and told them the same 2 stories in rotation. How their mother once tried to bake a cake with salt instead of sugar. How she learned to ride a bike by shouting her own encouragement into the wind. Emma asked for the cake story on hard days. James asked for the bike when the world felt tilted. Sometimes I slipped and said your mom instead of your mother, and the children would smile like I'd remembered something important rather than forgotten a script. School mornings found us early on purpose. Lunches packed, shoes located without turning the place into a search warrant. We practiced goodbyes that didn't cling too hard. I watched them walk toward the door, and, every day, they looked back halfway, and every day I gave them the little salute we invented, the two-finger flick that means I'm here and you're brave, and we can do this again tomorrow. A counselor at the community center taught us a trick with jars. We labeled 3, mad, sad, scared. We wrote down feelings when they were too big to carry and fed them to glass. On Fridays we opened one and read a few slips, not to fix them, but to admit them into the record. The jars made a soft, honest music when we shook them, paper tapping paper, proof that we were not empty. Some nights the apartment smelled like pancakes for no good reason except that the day had asked too much and breakfast is an apology you can make before bed. We ate them with our fingers and laughed at the syrup that found impossible places. When the dishes were finally washed and the books closed, I stood in the hall between their doors, felt the light warm my shoulder, and understood that permission wasn't something I had to give them. It was something we were giving each other, one routine at a time, until the house could hold our sorrow without spilling it. The napkins. When Emma dropped her fork, she ducked like she expected the room to flinch. It didn't. James laughed at a joke that wasn't good enough to deserve it, and then laughed again, real this time, at the first laugh. After dinner, we framed their mother without ceremony. A photo on each nightstand, another on the dresser where the drawers stuck at the end and needed that little lift she used to give. Emma traced her mother's smile with her fingertip and didn't cry. She just breathed, the kind of breath that gathers itself after being held too long. James stood at the doorway to the hall and flicked the switch once. The light came on. He nodded like a foreman approving a beam. When I tucked them in, the street outside made its normal noises, someone arguing amiably with a grocery bag, a buzz sighing to a stop, a door upstairs closing with respect. I left the hallway light on. A minute later I heard it, the small sound 2 children make when they remember that sleep isn't a trick. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold, let the butter and vanilla linger in the air, and finally exhaled with them. The first crack didn't look like a crack. It was a listing. 3 rooms photographed within an inch of their lives, light so scrubbed it looked invented. The caption read, "Pristine family home, motivated seller." Motivated is a small word with a big shadow. Daniel printed the listing and circled the date. 2 weeks since the funeral. "That's speed," he said. "That's strategy." I nodded and felt the floor tip a degree. Then came the bank statements, more arithmetic than accusation. Late fees humming along the margins. A credit card withdrawn for cash, never a good verb. Payments to a furniture store that matched the glossy surfaces now staged for strangers. He had been reupholstering the ship while taking on water. I wanted to be surprised. I wasn't. Grief rearranges people. So does debt. At the school, the secretary lowered her voice to tell me about a form she'd been asked to sign that would release records for a potential transfer. There was a new district typed neatly into the box, 3 states away, and a sister's name in the emergency contact line. "We haven't processed it," she said, touching the corner of the paper as if it might burn. "We were waiting for the hearing." Waiting, in this case, was mercy disguised as bureaucracy. He called at night as if nothing were on fire. "Good news," he started, tone bright with the kind of confidence you rent by the hour. "Got an offer above asking. Market's crazy. We'll move quickly. Kids will love the beaches." He said beaches like a bribe. I let him finish drafting his new weather report. "You mean the beach is 3 states away?" I said. "The ones you can't move them to." Silence on the line, then the mass tried to reseat itself. "We'll work it out. Co-parenting and all that." "You're not their other parent," I said, and felt the truth click into place with a clean sound of a latch. "And you don't get to erase their mother's map." The next day, a realtor's flyer appeared on my windshield at the apartment complex, neat and presumptuous. "Thinking of a fresh start?" it asked, a smiling couple promising ease. I folded it in half and half again, until it was a square no larger than guilt, and dropped it in the bin. When he showed up at the school during pickup, he wore sunglasses though the sky was plain. He stood too close to the line and waved like a candidate. James's shoulders went narrow. Emma looked for the counselor without being obvious. I walked over with the order in my pocket, not a weapon, a boundary, and we stood on either side of a chalk line children had drawn for a game at recess. Supervised visits, I said, handing him the schedule Daniel had negotiated. We'll keep to it. He scoffed, a small, graceless sound. You're making this ugly. No, I said. I'm keeping it honest. By then, the stories were telling on him even when he didn't speak. A friend of his let slip about a networking retreat that had been a weekend in a condo with a view of the very beaches he'd promised. The urgent repairs, fun drained into restaurants where the knives are louder than the conversation. A storage unit rented, contents undisclosed. All of it added up to a man sprinting toward a future that didn't have children in the foreground so much as in the way. Back at the apartment that night, Emma asked if we could plant basil on the windowsill because her mother liked the smell on her fingers. I pinched the leaves to show her how it releases the scent and told her yes. Behind us, James arranged his homework across the table like he was staking a claim. The mask could slip, the sales could hurry, the plans could race ahead of permission. In here, we were building a life that didn't require a brochure to feel real. The second hearing didn't feel like a battle so much as the end of a long, careful measurement. We filed in with our piles of paper, our small, unglamorous truths. The judge read, asked, read again. No speeches. No theatrics. Just the slow work of naming what had already become real in the rooms where we sleep and eat, and tell the truth to children. Daniel spoke for 10 minutes that felt like a level sliding across a board until the bubble found center. School notes. Bank ledgers. The recorded wishes in my daughter's voice. Love arranged in advance and notarized. The other side tried to sell beaches and momentum. The court preferred maps and stability. The order came without fanfare. Legal and physical custody to the maternal grandfather, the judge said, eyes on the page, then up at me to make sure I heard it in both places. Visitation for the stepfather as set forth. No relocation without written consent of the guardian or further order of the court. The clerk stamped the paper, and the sound reached something in my ribs that had been waiting months to exhale. Then she turned to the matter of the trust. Pursuant to the decedent's instrument, she said, the children's trust activates in full. The grandfather is appointed trustee with oversight as specified. It was cold language wearing warm news. Tuition handled without bargaining. Counseling covered without drama. Shoes that fit when feet insist on growing overnight. A future that doesn't depend on who is in a good mood. My role took shape in sentences. Authorized to consent to medical care. Authorized to enroll, withdraw, and sign. Authorized to decide bedtime, and to make pancakes too late at night after bad dreams. The list wasn't written that way, but that's how it sounded in my head. The court named what we had already been doing and gave it a seal. He didn't look at me when it ended. He looked at his phone again, as if relief might have texted. Outside the courtroom, he muttered something about appeals and fairness. I didn't answer. There are rooms where words can only shrink what has been rightly decided. Daniel squeezed my shoulder once, a carpenter satisfied the beam would hold. At the school, the principal made a copy of the order and slid it into a file with my name spelled correctly for the first time since this began. The secretary updated the pickup list. A teacher walked by, saw the paper, and smiled with her whole face. We didn't need to explain. Paper can be a kind of weather. The hall felt warmer. At home, the mail brought the official letters, with their seals pressed deep into heavy stock. I set them on the kitchen counter by the bowl of bruised apples, and called the children into the living room. I told them that the judge had said out loud what we already knew, that I was in charge of the boring things and the big things and the in-between, that our address was not a question, that their mother's plans had been heard by the people who decide such matters. James nodded like a foreman again, and asked what was for dinner. Emma asked if the hallway light would stay on forever. As long as you need it, I said, and meant until the bulbs burn out and I am old and somebody else changes them for us. Later, after homework, I signed the first trust disbursement request. Counseling appointments booked without waiting lists, new sneakers that won't blister, a framed photo for each nightstand so the glass can keep telling the truth. I put the papers back in the drawer that sticks unless you open it with intention. Then I stood in the hall between their doors and listened to a house that belongs to us repeat its ordinary sounds. Named plainly. Lawfully. Ours. We started with the walls. I took the blue box of photos to the table and let the children choose. Emma set aside anything where the smiles felt forced and picked the ones where their mother was caught mid-laugh, hair escaping its plan. James chose a picture from the park where she's looking off to the side at something we can't see, but trust is good. We bought simple frames that didn't compete with faces. The glass made a quiet sound when I pressed it in, like a page turning. We hung one by the door so her grin is the last thing we see when we leave, and the first thing we meet when we come home. On the balcony, which had previously been a place for neglected chairs to grow polite, we planted her favorites. Emma pushed basil seeds into soil with the seriousness of a surgeon. James negotiated the depth of the marigolds as if he were setting rebar. I told them how their mother loved the smell of tomato vines on her wrists, the way it sticks for hours like a promise. We watered in silence long enough to make it a ritual. Later, when the evening light found the leaves, the place looked like we'd invented a small summer of our own. The living room surrendered to laughter by degrees. I moved the couch so the lamp could earn its keep and rolled up the rug on Fridays for what we now call indoor gym. Cartwheels of dubious legality, pillow fort construction, a soft landing area for jokes that don't stick their landings. I stopped telling them to put the board game away between meals and started telling them to make a path to the kitchen big enough for a man carrying a skillet. Mess returned like an old song, easy to remember, impossible not to hum. We cooked with a kind of joyful imprecision that would have horrified the thin cookbook I used to think was gospel. Eggs on nights that needed mercy. Soup when the weather lost its nerve. Pancakes when the day had taken more than it gave. Emma learned to crack an egg with one confident tap. James learned that flour floats and will decorate a kitchen if you let it. I learned that I could stand in a room where everything reminded me of my daughter and still be grateful for the reminders. We built a shelf for treasures that aren't expensive. A pine cone from the schoolyard that looks like a grenade. A marble that refuses to stay put on a flat table. A note I found in the pocket of my daughter's old coat, by Milk, called Dad, Breathe. The shelf is next to the framed photo from the park. The two talk to each other when we're not listening. At night, I sit in the hall between their doors and read the quiet the way I used to read a newspaper, looking for signs the world is mostly intact. The hallway light throws a thin gold across the floor, same as always, but the feeling is new. The apartment has adjusted its posture. It no longer waits for bad news. It expects footsteps, the thud of a school bag, somebody forgetting they're holding a glass while telling a story too big for hands. On Sunday, we went to the garden store for steaks and came back with a geranium that didn't ask permission to be bright. We set it by the window. Jane said it looked like a little fire that wouldn't hurt anyone. Emma said it looked like Mom's lipstick the day she wore the red dress, and declared the living room a dance floor. I didn't say anything. I turned on the radio and let the music cross the room while the basil released its stubborn sweetness and the laughter arrived without knocking. We meet at the center with the soft chairs and the clock that doesn't pretend time is kind. A counselor sits near enough to matter, far enough to remind us the air has rules. The first visit, he arrives early, sunglasses on a gray day, smile too quick. The children stand on either side of me like small shorelines. I don't step forward. I don't step back. I nod toward the room with the table and the basket of board games that have survived 1,000 negotiations. House rules, I say, not unkind. We keep voices low. We keep promises smaller than the children. We leave on time. He glances at the counselor, as if there's a loophole visible only to professionals. There isn't. Emma chooses the dog-eared deck of cards and deals with the solemnity of a judge. Jane sits but doesn't lean in yet. He's keeping score with his eyes. Their father asks about school, and they answer like kids who have learned the difference between questions and openings. He tells a story about a new job and a city with beaches. The counselor coughs softly, a reminder that our county line is not a dotted suggestion. I learn a new skill, staying present without filling the room. I watch the children's shoulders, the barometer more honest than words. When Emma's inch upward, I ask if anyone wants water. When James starts to perform his laugh, I tell a worse joke to give him something safe to reject. I never correct their father in front of them. I never let a sentence stand that makes them small. The railings are there so no one confuses a bridge with a cliff. He tries once, just once, to bargain with the past. If we could do drop-offs at my place, it would feel more normal. The counselor's pen doesn't pause. Normal, I say. will be something we earn. Here first. I keep my tone level, the way you speak to a dog you want to love you and not bite. He nods. Not agreement. Recognition. Weak stack. He comes on time. He brings snacks that are less about sugar and more about thought. He remembers Emma hates pulp and orange juice, and that James will read aloud if you pretend you're not listening. On the 4th visit, he asks the counselor what books might help him talk about grief without scaring the kids. On the 6th, he arrives with a photo of their mother he'd found wedged behind a drawer, and hands it to Emma like a fragile thing he doesn't trust himself to carry. I watch the children move toward him a few degrees. Earned, not assumed. Boundaries do their quiet work. We keep to the schedule. We share school dates on a family calendar that doesn't function as a leash. When he calls outside the window, I send the hours back to him wrapped in the word no that learned how to be generous by being firm. And when the goodbye hugs happen at the door with the counselor watching but not needed, I stand where the children can see me and touch the railing with my fingers, a private reminder. Crossings are safest when everyone knows where the edge is. On the drive home, Emma says the visits don't make her stomach hurt anymore. Jane says the jokes are better when nobody is trying too hard. I flip on the turn signal, wait for the opening, and take it. That's all a bridge is, in the end, a way across that holds. The fridge is a bulletin board of ordinary victories. Report cards held up by a magnet shaped like a lemon. Emma's spelling test with a star that looks like the teacher drew it while laughing. Jane's science project photo. 2 kids grinning beside a lopsided volcano that stained the driveway pink for a week. Next to them, a schedule with more crossed-off days than blank ones. We have made a habit of getting through. By the door, shoes line up like small animals, each with a history. Mud dried in the treads from the trail behind the school. Grass clippings in Emma's sandals from the backyard, where the basil keeps showing off. Jane's sneakers with a rip at the toe he won't let me fix because he says it looks like the shoe is smiling. I stopped asking them to keep the entry immaculate. I ask only that they leave enough space for a man carrying groceries and a basket of laundry to pass without swearing. Mornings begin on the porch with coffee and the sound the neighborhood makes when it trusts the day. Garbage truck brakes sighing, a neighbor's laugh cutting clean through cool air, a dog who insists on telling everyone what's what. The geranium we planted last spring throws out more red than seems reasonable, and the tomato vines leave green on my wrists when I brush past to water. I take the first sip and let the quiet do its work. It's not the silence of something missing anymore. It's the hush that comes before a good song. Inside, the house carries our shape without strain. Homework still sprawls across the table, but now it knows when to tidy itself for dinner. The hallway light is off most nights. When it's on, it's for weather or bad dreams, not policy. We frame new photos without retiring the old ones. Their mother lives in wood and glass and, more importantly, in the jokes we repeat and the recipes we know by muscle memory. Sometimes Emma wears the locket and forgets she has it on. Sometimes James falls asleep with a book across his chest, mouth open, a boy and a person at once. Their father shows up on schedule. The center's chairs have learned our names. He's softer around the edges, less performative. He asks better questions and waits for answers that aren't immediately useful to him. The kids come home with stories that don't need translating. Earned, still, but easier. The trust pays for the things trust should pay for. Braces, a camp where Emma learned to paddle a canoe in a straight line. Counseling we no longer attend every week, but keep on the calendar like a toothbrush. You don't wait until something hurts. My own appointments are on there too. Blood pressure under control, shoes that don't make my knee complain, a paint class on Tuesdays where my pears still look suspicious but less so. On Sundays we still make pancakes too late and eat them too fast. Grease pops, syrup climbs, and I let it. We open the blue box less often. When we do, it's to add a new scrap, a ticket stub from the school play, a leaf James swears is from a tree that doesn't grow here. Grief hasn't left. It's simply stopped trying to be the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, after lights out, I sit on the top step of the porch with a second cup I don't need and listen to the house breathe. The promise I made to the dark in a driveway a lifetime ago sits beside me like an old friend. I kept it. The children sleep in rooms that remember their mother and belong to their future. And me? I am not the man waiting in a car for the sun to open a diner anymore. I am a grandfather with coffee on a quiet porch, a calendar full of small duties, and a life that fits in my hands.